Silicon Flatirons is a research center at Colorado Law School. We work with students to give them the tools they need to pursue careers in tech, law, policy, and entrepreneurship.
When I started, Silicon Flatirons was an experiment. It was me and some students putting on a few conferences without really a plan where it was going to go. My initial motivation was because I didn't believe you could have impactful policy discussions unless you brought people together across different disciplines. Silicon Flatiron Center has given me an image of what a team can look like.
And it really made Boulder into a location that was seen as on par with DC or Silicon Valley and other places around the country that are leading thought centers in the field of law and tech.
What's excited me the most is to see it grow, but not only just grow in terms of the number of people attending our different events, but growing in terms of the different areas that we have been involved in.
When a law student says, I've got a passion for understanding the intersection of technology and law, but where do I get started with that? What Flatirons provides is a position to actually go angle for a job during their second summer where they're actually going to get to be involved directly in setting tech policy or in advocating around tech policy.
The Silicon Flatirons community is incredibly unique in how close it is and how people are willing to band together to move conversations forward.
It's one thing to be sitting in a room by yourself reading articles, and it's very much another thing to actually be sitting at a table talking to somebody about their daily experiences of trying to navigate compliance with a complex new law.
We're all a community of friends who enjoy spending time with one another.
The people we engage with through here are very much thinkers and thought leaders, so they're contributing to whether it's our strategy or our resources in really meaningful ways.
Silicon Flatirons has changed the dynamic between Colorado law and the surrounding community as well as the national community.
One of the great joys of my profession is talking to people who are really early in their careers and helping them get excited about what you're excited about.
We get the types of people in the room that everyone thinks should be talking to one another, but often are not.
I get to work with students, I get to work with attorneys, I get to work with policymakers at the intersection of all these issues.
Students are first and foremost, so everything is generally student-driven.
And it is centered around people who are wanting to engage with students.
I've seen students come into Silicon Flatirons just having a little interest in it, in year one, and by year three, they're passionate about it and they found their career.
And I think that really helps the standing of the university more broadly, and it also attracts lots of really interesting and talented speakers.
I think what I'm excited to see happen with Silicon Flatirons in the next 5, 10, even 20 years is for it to blend continuity with change.
It's not enough to have smaller conversations anymore. The world is all connected, and Silicon Flatirons is going to reflect that global nature of the internet as we move forward into 20 years in the future.
I hope it continues to operate with the same spirit of experimentation, of adventure, of seeking out new challenges that we've done over the first 20 years.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amy Stepanovich, and I'm the Executive Director of Silicon Flatirons, and I'm so honored to be able to welcome you here with us today virtually. I can't wait till we can be back together in the same room, when I can connect with you one-on-one and hear more about what you're thinking about or what you're working on. It's been a great inspiration to me to see that sense of shared community that's present at every one of our events that I attend, and I'm so glad we can continue in that tradition, even when we're not together. If this is your first Silicon Flatirons event, I welcome you. Silicon Flatirons has a mission to elevate the debate around technology law, policy, and entrepreneurship, to spark tomorrow's conversations through intellectually honest programming and community engagement. I want to thank our staff, our speakers, and our full community for helping to inspire and execute the programming that you're going to see here today. And a special thank you to our supporters. It was so important to us to be able to provide the programming you're about to see free of charge, so that it could be accessible by anyone, regardless of any hardship they may be facing. We're so appreciative of our supporters' generosity, so we can continue to serve our full community. If you enjoy today's program, and you want to help us create more like it. And if you have the means, we would welcome a donation to Silicon Flatirons today. Every dollar you make has a long and lasting impact, and if you'd like to help us, you can go to siliconflatirons.org and click on the donate button. Thank you again so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy today's program.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Amy, for the wonderful introduction and the lovely video introducing us to Silicon Flatirons. I'm really honored to be part of this virtual event. It really is a brave new world we're in right now, and but I'm also very glad that we're living in a world that is very connected. And as Amy said in the video, the world is all connected right now, and we're just super happy that we can be here with you guys right now and hopefully share some tips on how to deal with some of the more interesting issues that some of us are dealing with today in the world of COVID-19. Just a little introduction for myself. I'm managing partner of a boutique privacy law firm, and I've practiced privacy law for 17 years, first at Dell, then Microsoft, and I first served as in their diversity committee, and then went back to private practice at Cooley & Perkins, where I built their privacy teams and also served on their LGBTQ committees. Prior to privacy law, I was at Weil, Gotshal & Manges at Norton Rose Fulbright and doing IP law and tech transactions. Just a couple of housekeeping matters before I introduce everybody else. We'd like everybody to put questions in the form of Q&A and not chat, please. If you can put the questions in the Q&A section, then it is more likely to actually be asked. And so we would really like to hear what your questions are and have an opportunity to have those answered. If you'd like a list of additional resources on the topics, please look at the event page at siliconflatirons.org, and you can see our list of resources on these topics that we're about to talk about. And then after the panel, you'll receive an email with a survey on the event as well as the CLE certificate. So look for that and don't forget to save that. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists. First, I have Dimock. Dean Dimock is the Senior Assistant Dean for Students at University of Colorado Law. Dean Dimock worked at Sutherland Asbill and Brennan LLP, focusing on corporate and securities matters, and at Dow Lonis, PLLC, and mergers and acquisitions. Dean Dimock has also worked as Vice President at Trammell Crow Company, where she had transactional and personal management responsibilities, and at Nixon Peabody LLP, where she was responsible for recruiting, integrating, training, coaching, evaluating, mentoring, advising, and facilitating departures of legal personnel. Immediately prior to her current position, Dean Dimock worked as Senior Career Advisor at Shannon & Match, specializing in attorney career development and talent management issues, career transition, and also in a consultative role to law firms, advising on issues such as attorney evaluation processes. So obviously some really great experience there from Dean Dimock on the issues that we have today. Anna Gomez is our next speaker. She is a partner at Wiley Rein. I guess they go by Wiley now. She's former National Telecommunications and Information Administration Deputy Administrator, specializing in a wide range of spectrum licensing issues and matters related to domestic and international telecommunications and unmanned aircraft systems, very interesting issues. As NTIA Deputy Administrator, Anna worked on communications and information policy on behalf of the administration and advising the White House. Anna served for 12 years in various positions at the FCC, including Senior Legal Advisor to the then Chairman William E. Kennard and Deputy Chief of the International Bureau, where she developed and implemented commission policy on international telecommunications and satellite spectrum. She's currently the co-chair of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Practice Group and Wiley's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Next, Kristine DeBry is she's Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel at Public Knowledge. She focuses on coordinating strategy and creating opportunities for public interest advocates. Kristine served as an attorney for telecommunications, internet, and video innovators at Swidler Berlin, and later as Senior Counsel and Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs at PBS. She also served as Senior Counsel to the Chairman of the Postal Regulatory Commission and as speechwriter to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And so with that, I'd like everyone to give us a little bit more background about sort of your experience in hiring and onboarding so that we can kind of warm up and launch into our questions. We're going to break this up into 3 different groups. First, we're going to talk about finding a job. Then we're going to talk about virtual interviewing. Then we'll talk about virtual onboarding. And then last, if we have time, we'll also talk about how to handle job cancellations, because I know that that's an issue that a lot of people have had to deal with job cancellations happening during COVID-19. But we do want to make sure that there's time for questions, and so we will make sure to leave time for questions and make sure that those get answered. And so with that, let's go ahead and talk to Dean Dimock. Can you give us a little bit of thoughts on sort of what is your background experience in this area, and just briefly touch on that.
Sure, thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. I can't help in my background but go back to when I was a law student at CU Law School, and I really didn't know. I would say that how I found a job was completely different from what I expected, and it was entirely through talking to people versus what I thought might be the process. And I was really fortunate to start working in DC and very quickly to be involved in the hiring effort, and then in running the summer program. And then when I was, as I progressed a little bit, was involved more in onboarding, and then continued to stay involved in that in DC. And then I'm now, this is my 10th year at CU, and we have had the good fortune of obviously helping lots of students, and then also hiring staff and folks to work at CU. So hopefully I can be helpful. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Susan.
Sorry about that. I'm just going to leave my mic off or on. Whitey, can you give us a few thoughts as well? And you're muted right now as well. So, oh, sorry, Kristine, sorry.
So in my role as Chief of Staff at Public Knowledge, I have an intersection with the hiring of all of the staff people who come on board. And actually during the pandemic, we have hired one recent law school graduate, and that's an interesting story, which maybe we'll get to, but she came to us through an externship and then was kind of in the right place at the right time, so there's hope. And also I run a fellowship program at Public Knowledge where we have established fellowships and found funding and trained 21 or 2-year fellows who are most often law students who are just graduating and want to work in the public interest space, but the public interest space isn't really a place where there are a lot of jobs for people who just graduated from law school. So we created this fellowship program. It's also been a major diversity driver. And so I've learned a lot about early career people and what they need and how to find people and how to help them navigate.
Awesome. And Anna.
Yes. So as you noted, I'm the chair of Wiley's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So I tend to participate in our hiring process from that perspective. I also, the way that we do hiring at the law firm is all partners and associates tend to be some part of the hiring process, whether it's the interviewing or onboarding. So quite a few years of that here at the law firm.
Wonderful. And so let's go ahead and launch into our first discussion, which is kind of a nice segue to what Anna was just talking about, which is finding a job. And so before we get to the interviewing part of it, what are some thoughts you guys might have about how you've seen others approach you? Most of you are in the position of hiring rather than looking for a job, but I'm certain that you have had people reach out to you. What are some successful things that you've seen people do, or tips you've heard about how to network and, doing that in this weird time when we can't just go out for coffee and lunch? So anyway, can start. Feel free to jump in.
Well, I know we say we're not able to go out for coffee, but I am finding more and more that people are reaching out to have coffee. And it's really just a time to chat, whether it's by teleconference or by video conference. I've even heard of people sending gift cards to a local Starbucks or to Grubhub or something. Oh. I haven't had that happen yet, but I think that's such a terrific idea. But, in a way, if I had a message for anybody, it's that you should feel even less shy about reaching out to people during this time when we're all working virtually, because everybody likes having the connections, and it's actually easier if you can simply connect quickly, have a conversation. There's less travel time to go to the coffee shop, so we actually, I think, have more time to engage in this type of networking than we do during our normal days. So I've had people reach out via LinkedIn. That happens a lot, actually. Although when you're at a law firm, everybody knows your contact information. But for some reason, I think people feel more comfortable reaching out via LinkedIn. And then one thing that I appreciate is when students in particular, but anyone who's in a job search, reach out and through other people as well. So, they talked to such and such as a general counsel at this association, and that general counsel sends me an email that says, "Hey, Anna, would you mind getting together with this person?" And I always say yes. I can't think of anybody who doesn't want to pay it forward one way or another. And so I guess just good old-fashioned reaching out and touching people is, to me, a really good way of doing it.
Dimock, any additional thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think that I agree with all of that. And I think in terms of just thinking about the inhibitions that people might feel, I agree with the advice to not be shy. And I think that asking for advice is a great way to do it, because I think sometimes when you're on the other side and somebody asks you for something, you think, oh, but I'm not hiring anybody. But I think on the part of the people being asked, it's important to know that just that connection and some brainstorming can really be helpful. And so if somebody reaches out to say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you have any time to talk, to give me advice? I think that is really, that often gets a really good result. And I would also say never take it personally if you don't hear back, because while it's true that we have more time in some ways, sometimes we have less time. Sometimes you just miss a message. So I would say, I would never say to follow up more than a second time, but I'm always sad when students say, like, I didn't hear back, and so I give up. And of course, like that, it's always worth a second try. So thank you.
I agree. I'm guilty of not following up sometimes right away, and I actually feel like when somebody reaches out a second time, it means they're really interested and they're not just sort of broadly spamming people, and to me it makes a difference, and it makes me more likely to reach out. So any other thoughts on tips on finding a job, Kristine?
Well, if I just step in for a second, I agree with the just asking for help. Law firms have a very structured recruiting program. You may be reaching out of time, but I may have gotten outreach from other people who are looking for folks. Just during the pandemic, I've had at least 3 friends reach out who have positions in their organizations, and they're looking for people. And so whenever I know people are looking, I forward that information to them. So it's also just a way of knowing what's active out there, what's possible out there. I actually had a FCC person, a chief of staff of one of the bureaus, reach out to me by Facebook Messenger asking for help with recruiting for a couple positions. And I was able to send someone over there. So you're not just asking for help to get a job at the place of work of the person to whom you're reaching out. You are also trying to find what's available out there.
Absolutely, and I just encourage everybody to, if you hear about new jobs, I like to keep like a little file of jobs that are out there, particularly in my area. People often reach out to me because they know I'm in contact with people who are interested in privacy. I also keep a file of resumes, and so I will periodically match those up and suggest people for different jobs. And particularly in this time, I think I'm a little more on top of that, because it seems like this is a time when that's one way you can help during this time, and it's a very easy thing to do, and skills that we all have. So So in addition to finding a job, let's say you found a job, and let's talk about virtual interviewing during this time, and what does that look like? Here we are all on a webinar, and we're all talking virtually, and but what are some tips? I think a lot of people are maybe not as familiar with technology, and what tips do you guys have about either systems that you've used or interviewing candidates in different situations, and how do you make people feel connected? And there's often a lot of talk in Silicon Flatirons around the technical divide, and how do we address that too? And feel free to address any of those issues. So if Anna, if you want to start, since you just well, go ahead and let you keep going there.
Sure. I think flexibility is the key. And now I'm speaking from the employer perspective, not from the job seeker perspective, because you raise a very good point. To me, I think it's preferable, if you can, to have a video conference for the interview. Use WebEx or Zoom as we are right now, but it's not always possible. And frankly, there's times when the situation at home may not be optimal for the applicant to be able to do a video conference. Live in a small apartment with 3 small babies and 2 dogs and a cat and a parrot. It may be better to, so we are very understanding of that, and we're very flexible. Or maybe they don't have access to good broadband. The reason I prefer video conferencing if possible is because anytime you're interviewing, it's difficult to be able to gauge how people are reacting to you by phone. It can be very awkward. So that's something you have to keep in mind, on both sides. Meaning, if you're not doing it by video conference and you're not able to gauge that reaction, keep in mind that it's suboptimal on the phone, and it can be awkward, and you don't want to have some kind of a bias against just because of that situation with the technology. But a couple other things, of course, we were talking about this before. When you're doing interviewing, make sure that you don't have anything in your room that is going to be off-putting or signal something to an employee. The story I heard was that someone had a gun on their wall, and the reaction can just be negative to something like that, or to certain art. So you want to be careful about what message and what your brand is being relayed through your surroundings. From a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, you want to treat each applicant the same, meaning ask the same questions that you would have asked in an in-office interview as you would ask in the interview. You want to make sure you check your biases before and after. Consider your evaluation immediately after the interview. And like I said, always apply the same criteria to every candidate. So keep in mind those types of principles as you are both conducting the interview, but also post-interview when you're evaluating the candidate.
Those are great tips, and I would imagine that there would be even more opportunity for bias depending on the backgrounds that are available for different people, and maybe trying to set this aside as interviewers. Kristine, any thoughts on either from a hire perspective, tips for the hirer or for the interviewee?
Well, I think starting with the basics. So for both the hirer and the interviewee, if you have an opportunity to exchange emails about what type of technology you're going to use, try that. We live in a Zoom world at my office, but there are lots of other types of technology, and I've learned now to get on every call 5 minutes early and make sure you understand how technology works if it's not one that you use in your world. So be generous with each other about trying to get that information preloaded. And then I think just the really basic professionalism type of things, which anybody can grab. You guys actually circulated a great video of yourself on Zoom. Make sure you get your background right, and do it the way that you would dress up for an interview. You would think about getting everything right if you were going for an in-person interview, and try to take it seriously the same way. And I have talked to a few people who have had the hoodie on. So people have lost touch a little bit, but try to take it, seriously in the same way you would if you were presenting yourself at a real live interview.
Yeah, I have to say, I was really delighted today to put something on other than sweatpants, and although no one can see my pants, I'm still wearing nice pants just because it feels nice during the interview. And there have been some psychological studies that actually say that when you do dress nicely, it does help you play the part and feel better about and more confident as well. So I think there's something to that. Dean Dimock, anything else?
Yeah, I would say also, in addition to do a mock interview, do a mock interview in the Zoom setting. When I was helping lawyers who were mostly involuntarily leaving large firms, we really tried to have them do practice interviews, because you can make so much of a difference in how well you interview just by doing one practice interview. And often it helps with nerves, and you can get great feedback on the length of your answers and all sorts of things. So I think it can be hard to, it can be really nerve-wracking to do the practice, but it's usually well worth it. And then there's some amazing stuff, thanks to the younger generation, about ring lights. So ways that you can change how you look with your lighting. And I do think it's worth a little bit of time on that before doing an interview. You can tell my lighting. I haven't done that at this point, but I think there's more coming out on that every week. So it's worth a quick look.
Yeah, I think the technology in that area is about to really ratchet up. So other thoughts in looking at what people were talking about in terms of their experiences in interviewing and during this very strange age. One of the things I saw was somebody who had actually who'd interviewed and hired without ever stepping foot in the city that she was being hired for. And I thought that was quite fascinating. And it made me think, well, how do you get a sense of the culture of a place, or a place for that matter, when you're having to hire somebody in this time and age when they can't even come and travel to where you are? Any thoughts on things you guys might do or have done to help accomplish that, or things you've heard about that people have done to overcome that? It's definitely a different time now. So let me know your thoughts on that.
I think the more talking to peers, future peers that people can do, whether it's, and if it's about the city and it goes beyond, through affinity groups, and particularly any efforts that as employers we can make to connect people to folks who may have similar backgrounds or identities, I think is really terrific. So so that people looking at jobs can ask, what's it like for you with this identity in that location and position and that kind of thing. I think it takes some more different research for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And any thoughts from your end, Kristine?
Well, I don't have any original ideas about sharing your culture in the interviewing process because that's not something that has come up as much. For a couple of our people, we had already started the interview process, and we're fortunate to have some in-person interviews. Otherwise, we've just had more phone calls, or more Zoom calls. We've offered people the opportunity to talk to people. But I think where we've done a little bit more of that is for people who are new. We have set up a lot of sort of regular Zoom calls that we didn't have before. Yep. So for example, we have a lunchroom once a week that's our entire staff. We have 5 interns on the lunchroom now and 3 new hires. And, people talk about people things, not work things.
Right.
Get to know people a little bit better, but we've had to create these sort of virtual replicas of things that we used to do, weekly meetings and that kind of thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm on Zoom all day, which isn't feasible for everyone. But we've just tried to replace some of the experiences that we used to have in person.
Yeah, some other things I've heard of are people, sending more information, about like the city or the firm and or you know the company, and sending you know, like guides for the city, you know, that they're you know, interviewing to be in eventually, once this is all over, so they have a better sense of it. And you know, perhaps sending videos and things like that just to give people a sense. Some firms have like histories and, you know, little books about their history that can be helpful to get people a sense of what the culture is as well. And have you thought of anything, or have you seen anything like that in your firm?
Yeah, that's more during our onboarding. I agree with what Wiley and Kristine both said about sort of having individual conversations with people, trying to, you know, give them off chances to sort of get to understand the firm culture. But that's something we normally do in person anyway. So
that's true. Yeah. Well, and then, yeah, I think your firm probably has already done all that interviewing previously too, and so maybe these are things to think about for the, you know, upcoming.
Yeah. No, we've been doing virtual interviewing for other positions. Our chief marketing officer did the virtual thing. She started. We onboarded her. I actually talked to her before this to get her feedback on how that went. So she gave me some good ideas. But in terms of onboarding, you do want to try to make people feel as included, integrated as possible into the team, because to them, I mean, they may have stepped in the building before, but they don't really have that comfort yet of understanding the culture, understanding how people communicate. So, did I lose you guys?
No, we can still hear you.
Okay. My screen disappeared. So we'll send a little bit of a gift and a hello with some firm swag. As we like to call it. We normally assign a mentor to new people, but we actually assign two, and we do very regular check-ins. And this has been top to bottom at the firm, where, just like Kristine said, we have weekly communications. We do weekly video chats with our partners. We do weekly video chats with our associates. It's just a constant communication to make sure that people are comfortable. And again, from the diversity perspective, it is so important that all attorneys, all staff, feel included and comfortable in the environment. Because one of the major reasons why people leave law firms is because they don't feel included or comfortable in the culture. So we really focus on that as when we onboard people, especially virtually. We're about to hit that when our summer associates start in 2 weeks, because we did not cancel our program, but we're going completely virtual. And that's going to be quite an experiment in how we can make it an environment that is helpful to them, but as well to us, that makes them feel completely integrated into the firm from wherever they are in the country. And half of our summer associates are not local.
Yeah, we just had our first summer associate start on Monday, and you know, realized we hadn't really thought about making sure that person had a proper screen and keyboard and mouse, and now we're scrambling to make sure. Thankfully, he's in the same city, so it's pretty easy to get those things delivered. But making sure that that person has all the right setup, because you can't assume that you know, whoever you're hiring is going to have all the things that they need, and making sure that they have a good setup, so they're set up for success. You know, same sort of things they would have in a normal workplace is very important. I want to talk about a little bit about before we go too deep onto the virtual onboarding stuff. It sort of segues into that a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about employers' plans for working during the time of COVID-19. Different states have different plans and stages and, you know, openings, and what are you guys seeing in terms of your plans, or what plans that you've heard about, or if you were a candidate, what would you be asking in terms of what an employer's plan is for returning to work or working before returning to work during COVID, and what the expectations are? I mean, I've heard horror stories. I'm a privacy attorney, so of course I hear the horror stories, but if, employers, making cameras recording their employees so they can monitor them and make sure they're sitting at their desks, hopefully, folks aren't doing that. I would highly recommend not. There are, other expectations, though, in terms of availability and the like that people will have. But then also, I would imagine that people have accommodations as well during this time. In addition to COVID-19, now we're dealing with some, really difficult issues as a country that affect everyone in different ways. And so, from a diversity standpoint, one of the things I've been finding is, making sure that people feel comfortable about taking some time off. If we could talk a little bit about that, and how are people making accommodations? How are people setting expectations for working during this time? And, what's different about that? Anyone? Kristine?
Well, that's a really big question. Those are big questions. I would say maybe it starts with empathy, just taking the time, opening space up on staff meeting on Monday morning or whenever you have it, to just open time for people to express how they feel, and then on a more, or things they're facing on a more individual basis, I know I've already talked about checking in with people individually, but you can't have hallway conversations anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
If somebody looks like they're sad or so trying to sort of keep up with people. And, I've had conversations with people where I've said, it's okay if you just need to take the space to not beat yourself up about not being very productive today. I
have to tell myself that from time to time.
But yeah, I think people need to have permission to do the things that they need to do. And you need to make it really clear that you stand behind that, because it might mean that a deadline isn't met or you can't reach someone.
Right.
But everybody has these personal things that are coming into their life in lots of different ways right now.
Yeah, and I know that can be difficult in a law firm. Like, we have client expectations, and that's one of the things. I want to be accommodating and make sure that people, have the time to, to deal with this, the crazy stuff that's coming at them from a, home life perspective and world perspective. And one way I've dealt with that is just to, make sure people are communicating to me when, like, I need a timeout day, and then that way we can make sure we can have people take over and let them know that that's okay. How are you seeing this being dealt with in your firm?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's been an evolution. We're all going through this for the first time.
Yeah.
Right?
We're just making this stuff up.
Right. But initially there was a lot of fear, especially from parents, people with young children at home who knew they were going to be trying to deal with both the children, the homeschooling, the work. And so we did a lot of communicating around expectations and resources, ensuring that folks understood that we're flexible, and it, just as you said, we will find a way to get through this. You're not going to get retaliated against because you're going through this.
Right.
So that was initially. Then the first month, everything went actually very well, but it was very, very, I think, stressful. But people have hit a groove now, and people have found a way to work together. And I agree with you, and I agree with Kristine, the constant communication is so important, because it's not something people are going through alone. Everybody's going through that at the same time. And now on top of this, we have the incidents that we have going on right now with the protests.
Right.
And that is adding another level of stress for people who might be in the middle of it. We do still have people that now go into the office, and our road is closed. So we have an additional layer that we have to consider on top of virtual operations, Now we have this going on. And so making sure that we are flexible and listening and ensuring that people's needs are addressed, because we are the most productive when our people are productive, and our people are not productive if they are distracted and unhappy. So I think the firm has really stepped up. One of the nice benefits of all of this, if you can say that, is the firm has now fully embraced teleworking. It is understood that it is absolutely possible to do this. Not only is it possible, sometimes it's even preferable. So we have seen a 180-degree turn. 180? 360? Anyway, whatever the full turn is. In terms of, I think we already had a very flexible firm, but now I think we have wait a minute, this really does work. And we shouldn't be so fearful of having people work remotely. So I think you're going to see a lot more flexibility going forward than we even had before.
Yeah, Dean Dimock, can you also give some thoughts on like how you guys have communicated and addressed plans for dealing with working and either from the employee or employer perspective?
Yeah, I think the comments so far have been terrific, and I think one of the things to think about, particularly in larger organizations, is thinking about the responsibilities of some of your people. And in a law firm, it's always easy, right? Like ensuring that the timekeepers can be most productive is hugely important. And so I think that some of investing some more, and maybe it's repurposing people, but investing some more in the having a liaison who can understand the barriers to people's work and really be an ally and advocate for people, and whether that is technology. I also think that we all, I think that we are really fortunate at the law school with our IT folks, and I think we wouldn't have made this transition nearly as well without that. But I think really it is a question in terms of infrastructure, of thinking about who you have on your team that's supporting people in making sure they can do the work that they can do, and also just someone that's maybe not in their chain of command where they can talk freely. Because we do, I'm hearing a lot from around the country of people being afraid to take vacation, because what if then it's someone realizes that they're not indispensable. And so I think there does need to be a lot, there need to be some new lines of communication opened up, I think, in some cases. And,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, and you add that fear of being, any sort of job insecurity onto the imposter syndrome that's particularly prevalent among women and attorneys of color and queer attorneys. And I think you really just do need some a little bit of almost back channel communication so people can really say how they're doing.
Yeah, I sometimes when I'm having a one-on-one with an attorney, and their immediate reaction when I say, "How are things going?" and they say, "Oh, fine, fine." I'm like, "No, really, how are things really going?" Because it's not great for me. I don't know about you, but it kind of sucks right now. And so I'll just tell them how I feel and how things are difficult for me, and then sometimes they'll open up. We kind of had the opposite problem in that we're that you had, Anna, in that we were actually kind of set up to work more virtually, but then we found that a lot of people actually like going to the office, and so we ended up our office, our physical office actually grew more than we were expecting it to, although we were already set up to kind of work virtually. And now one of the challenges we're having is, as we're looking possibly at phase 2 here in the next, I hope, couple of weeks or so, whether or not we open up and how to make accommodations around that. And one of the things we just did is we sent out a poll asking how many people want to come back to work during the phase 2 process. And we also gave them an idea of what that would look like, because we said, look, people are not we're gonna have to be in shifts. Everyone's gonna have to schedule time. You can't, one of the things we did was obviously we followed the guidelines as a base, but then we added on to that, like, what works for our office. We have shared offices, and so we made, we had to come up with an arrangement where people would have to take shifts coming into the office. And then also think about things like, are we going to make snacks available? Are we going to, what kind of support are we going to have available? Are we going to let people just hang out in the kitchen? And, what expectations do we have for people, coming in and out? Are they going to wear masks in the common areas and things like that? And so we had to think about all those things. When the poll came back, and it sounds like most of the folks are, not wanting to work at the office until maybe phase 3. And so that was very helpful. But, we could have just opened up and just assumed everybody wanted to come work at the office in phase 2, and apparently that's not going to happen. So making sure there's communication too about what do people want to do, and giving them flexibility around that. And I think the other thing to keep in mind, I myself am immune compromised. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and so I have to take medicine that and so these are sort of disabilities that are sort of hidden normally in a normal work environment, that I think we need to also be thinking about and taking into consideration in this environment. Just because phase 2 means that most people can come to work, I think giving people the opportunity to express that, that's not going to work for me because this actually, could put my life at risk, is, conversations we weren't having before. And so I think, I've proactively had those conversations with folks and found out there are other folks in the office who have similar situations. And so we're trying to be proactive and make people feel comfortable about that as well. So that's from there, let's go on to a little bit more about virtual onboarding. Thank you, Anna, for starting the conversation on that. And Kristine, do you have any thoughts on how do you see employers handling onboarding differently now in this world? And we talked a little bit before about how to make people feel part of the team, but what are some other things, how do we convey like social norms and all the social welcoming and introductions and the mentoring and even the administrative tasks? How do you guys handle that, or have you heard about people handling that?
Well, nobody is an expert in this area.
Nope.
You never wanted to be an expert in. I'll say that preparation really is everything. When you have somebody coming in, especially more than one person, you need to be thinking a week in advance about what kind of documents they need for onboarding, all of the HR stuff. So of course we have an HR person who does that, but you need to be thinking about what team this person is going to be on and what their assignments are going to be, and how they want to grow, and everything from what their hours will be. Do you institute real hours for people who are onboarding virtually? And how do you do that? But it's really all about preparation, because someone's going to show up online Monday morning, and you're not going to be able to just walk in the office and, kind of chew the fat with them and figure it out together.
Right.
Loaded. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Dean Dimock, have you seen this, happening with either students or things you've heard, or how you guys are handling it at the university?
I do think there is a lot of giving someone a computer and like, come in, get your computer, do your paperwork, go home, we'll figure it out happening. And I think that I do think planning is important. And I think some of the things people have already said in terms of more frequent check-ins, and then also and I think we haven't touched on this so much, so I love the mention of the virtual lunchroom idea, some different ways of engaging. So we're very fortunate to have a couple of terrific colleagues who organized a trivia night, a few different
that's fun.
And of course, completely optional, and we saw just tremendous participation, even right before the exam period. Just some different things that you can do to build community that aren't, I think trying to find substitutes for the water cooler and make sure that those substitutes are as inclusive as possible are really important.
Yes, and I think these days we have to be a lot more intentional about those things as well. It's just, some of those things just happen naturally because people are hanging around the water cooler, and we have to sort of recreate that now, or at least give people the opportunity for that. And different people have different needs. Like you said, I think it is good to have it be optional. If you're introverted, you may not care about doing that sort of thing. But I do feel that I think this is the first time in the history as I've known it that extroverts are actually having a hard time dealing with society right now and how things are normally done as opposed to introverts. And so thinking about how to make sure their needs are met is something that I think we're having to be more attentive to than we have been in the past.
And we used to have to work so hard in law firms. I mean, it's still important, but my experience is they used to. But to avoid the tremendous impact of implicit bias in work assignments, right? You would see all the time that is nodding her head, that maybe the new associate who could play golf with the senior partner in a group would, get the work. And I do think I'm thrilled when I see some of these virtual things inspire engagement from people who I know struggle tremendously in face-to-face networking. And so there may be some good things in terms of work assignments.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a few things of goodness that come out of this, and as Anna mentioned before, I think some of that will probably continue going forward, and that I think that's going to be a really good thing. And one of the things I've heard about is that people, sometimes you have a situation where because people aren't able to go out, that folks are ending up working too hard, like they're working, around the clock. And have you seen any of that? And how would you suggest to address those sorts of situations and avoiding burnout of associates?
Yeah, there's this blurring of work time and home time because we're not walking out the door and going home, and so it's definitely a risk. We have an email that we send out every week it's called Wellness Wednesday, and there's always,
I love it.
Yeah, this is, I guess, wellness is a relatively new thing that law firms are really focusing on, and that includes mental health. And I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, our email encouraged people to take a mental health day if they needed it. And I sat back and I thought, wow, we really have changed in law firm land. Like we are doing that. But no, yes, I find it myself that, I have to disconnect from my device from work so that I can, have at least a couple hours at the end of the day where I'm not just constantly focused on work, because you need to separate your workspace from your home life. And I think you actually have to be mindful about it. It's hard because we all know we need to be connected, and sometimes the clients call and sometimes it's just not possible. But if we can do it, we really do have to be mindful about it. We, at the law firm, we're very plugged into our associates' workload, both because of the implicit bias issues. We want to make an equity that everyone has access to good work assignments. So we want to make sure that all of our associates have access to good assignments and to assignments that they want. We keep in mind those that are overworked. So we constantly get data to see how many hours they're working. That's not just how many hours they're billing, because you can still be working and not billing.
Right.
So we definitely want to keep an eye on that because we don't want people to burn out. And this issue of not having vacations, my vacation's canceled. I haven't taken a vacation. And we also don't have I have a doctor's appointment, so I need to take a couple hours off in the afternoon. I need to run an errand. We're not doing any of that. So we're just working. We're sitting at our desks working. So our lives have become more intense almost during the working hours. So it is definitely an issue we need to think about. On onboarding, you just reminded me, one of the things that we've had to change is that we need to do our training for onboarding over a 2-week period instead of a day and a half. Because it is very difficult to have someone just sit and listen and not have quite as much interaction and absorb what you're telling them.
Yeah.
If you do it, you need to do it in small chunks. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to absorb it. I remember Bart Simpson said, "My brain is full," and that's how I feel. Right. So that's one thing we think about.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I just saw a study about how you can't really conduct, conferences in the way that you used to in the past. You can't go from 8 a.m. to 5 o'clock in the afternoon with back-to-back online conferences, because people can only handle so many online meetings, and there's something about it psychologically that is much more stressful and draining to us as humans than the human interaction and seeing people and then walking through the hall and talking to people and then going to the next one. And having just the constant screen time, there's lots of theories about why this is, but it's very different and more stressful experience having screen time. And so breaking that up is, I think, very important. Kristine, any thoughts on other thoughts? One thing we haven't talked about as much is how are we setting up work from home? Offices and furniture, and how do you accommodate people with smaller living situations? What types of things are people doing to help people work from home? Just the physical things from home.
So I think law firms are more likely to be kind of at the forefront of this. So Anna, I don't have anything to add, but we are starting to distribute more office equipment and furniture and make opportunities available for people to come to the office or offer to deliver something, because some of our people don't have public, they don't want to use or can't use public transportation, and they don't have a car.
Right.
So you have to think about whether people have access to those things that they need. But yeah, this could be a long haul, so people do need to have at least the bare minimum of ergonomically appropriate office equipment. So that's a thing. One other thing, going back to you asked about reopening, and what we've seen that dovetails is we haven't really considered sort of a large scale reopening, but what's happened is that some people want to go back to work.
Right.
So. Yeah. Or like the few, rather than everybody goes back and you pick out the exceptions, it's more like everybody stays home, but then the people who are not in a conducive home environment to work or have something going on, like eventually the world will start having meetings again in person. I don't know when that will be. Be kind of a needs-based assessment in terms of how people go back. What do you need to go back for? Do you need to go back because you are on podcasts and you don't have good technology at your home and you need to go use the office technology, or what, so anyway, it's just a different way of looking at going back.
I agree. Yeah, even though most of our people don't want to go back, I have two who do, and one wants to go back because he can't make that separation between home life and work life work well, and he's just not he doesn't feel like he's as productive unless he can have a place to go to work. And I think making sure you're listening to people's needs and accommodating that during time is a good way to balance that, rather than have it be one size fits all. Everyone's going to do it this way. Be flexible and let find out what each person wants and accommodate that. And that's probably going to be easier for companies and firms to deal with anyway, to have more flexibility in that area, and try and accommodate everybody in the way. One thing we've been thinking about doing is, particularly as we move into phase 2, and here in Seattle, they're talking about having restaurants allow for outdoor seating, and opening up some of the restaurants. Here we haven't opened up any of the restaurants yet other than for takeout. But we've thought about, well, maybe we can have like 1 or 2 people come, and we have a rooftop deck at our office, and maybe we could all sit on the rooftop deck with masks on and, just have, a conversation that we're sit far enough apart that, there's lots of fresh air. And so it's a less, COVID conducive environment, and far less risk. And that can help replicate, some of the social interaction that we're kind of missing. And some of us are really, really craving and needing right now, particularly our junior associates who need more mentoring and more of that sort of one-on-one time. I'm feeling like a lot of them are feeling kind of isolated and alone right now. So any thoughts on that? Anything you've seen or ways you guys are handling, like these sorts of issues, either the technology setup or plans for work?
Returning
to work.
We have a fantastic IT shop as well, and they did 2 things really well. One was they did a lot of training before we went remote. to prepare us for going remote. And that was, down, how do you use WebEx? We really didn't use virtual, we usually didn't use video at all. We just used it for teleconferencing, and now we're all addicted to video. Our IT shop set up a portal for all attorneys and staff who need equipment. I know one attorney who's gone through 3 laptops. He's had the biggest curse when it comes to technology. But yeah, I needed a monitor. I just could not work on I have a laptop, firm supplied laptop, and I just could not see well enough. And so I just clicked on the portal and ordered the monitor, and I got it. And we're not going to talk about the 3 hours that it took me to set it up because I'm not technology adept. But yeah, having that IT support has been fantastic. And I gotta say, a lot of families have 1 computer in the house. That is not conducive if you have children that need to do their schooling. You got to do your work. So absolutely, the firm supports by providing the equipment that's necessary.
Yeah, I think not assuming that people have those. We had a question from Reid about whether employees, what they can do to support candidates who have these sort of difficult circumstances. Some people are dealing with loved ones who have COVID or have COVID themselves, and how are you dealing with that and communicating that, and childcare and some of us are living with curfew now and dealing with that. I have black helicopters floating over my I'm in Seattle, like feet from where the major protests are happening, and it's kind of difficult to concentrate sometimes when you've got all that going on. And so I think we do need to think about and be communicating about different resources and what kind of access they have, and whether or not you need to help supplement that and offer that help during this time, and be thoughtful. We are now at the 3 o'clock mark. This time, the last few minutes of our conversation went very, very quickly. Thank you guys so much for your time and your wonderful thoughts on this. I know these were complicated issues, and we're all just sort of muddling through this right now, but I really think you guys have really provided some really great food for thought here and some really great tips that we can all take away. I'm sure we'll come up with more as we're continuing to deal with this and the new challenges that the world is throwing at us. So thank you, everyone. And if again, everybody, there's a resource list if you want to learn more about these issues. And if you guys have any, feel free to reach out to me too after this webinar. Thank you. And thanks for everyone for participating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.